Welcome back to the Bonsai Builders Podcast. I'm your host, Addison. In our community, there's a special level of passion you see in the hardcore hobbyist, someone who balances daily life with an intense dedication to the art. They build, they create, and they push the boundaries of what's possible from their own backyard. Today's guest is a perfect embodiment of that spirit. Jeremiah Lee is a hobbyist whose work is turning heads, earning him an award for his incredible redwood at the recent Pacific Bonsai Expo. He's also the voice behind something that inspired me to start this podcast, which is the fantastic Black Pondo Podcast. And he's just completed a stunning garden build. So we're going to talk about dreams, dirt, and the digital age of bonsai. Jeremiah, it's great to have you on the show.
Really appreciate being on here. Thank you so much. I've really loved listening into your podcast. I think you are doing a fantastic job with it. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I still need to get as cool an intro as you. I just have some kind of dinky music, but the kind of amalgamation of bonsai and the Karate Kid references is pretty cool in yours.
Appreciate it. Wanted to make something fun. And yeah, I'm still playing with that. I think I'm going to change it from time to time, put different quotes in it, and just have fun with it.
Yeah, that's super cool. We'll have to talk later about how you did that, because I'm very interested in setting up something unique like that. Cool. So yeah, I mean, the mission of this podcast is looking at kind of what's the path of getting good from a hobbyist perspective. And I feel like, from my perspective at least, you're well along that path. So I would love to just start with your journey. Can you take us through a little bit about, how you started in bonsai, and then what have been the major inflection points for you along your journey, both in terms of your actual quality of trees, and then also just in how you feel that you're able to build trees?
Yeah, most definitely. Well, thank you very much. And I feel like I should be further along in many ways, because it's actually been a while since I've been into bonsai now. So I started getting into bonsai right out of college. So right after I graduated from UCSB in 2006, I got into bonsai. And I think I kind of got into it as just something that I was interested in Google searching while I was playing online poker for way too many hours right after finishing school. And somehow I quickly stumbled upon Peter T. I don't know how, but I feel like it was like the most fortuitous, lucky event that has ever happened, or one of them that's ever happened to me previously. And so I found out about Peter T through a guy named John Kirby, who was a student of Boone, and posted about how awesome Peter was on a bonsai forum way back in the day. So I think this was about 2007 or 2008. And I really wanted to learn and get better at bonsai. So I started studying under Peter T very early on. So I think I was only into bonsai for maybe something like 7 months to a year or so, and stumbled upon Peter. So this was before Peter went to Japan. He was not too far away from me. So I'm down near San Luis Obispo, California, and he was up in the San Jose area, which is probably about 3.5 to 4 hours north of me. And at the time, and we've joked about this quite a bit, but right after college, I moved in with my parents. He moved in with his parents for kind of just as a temporary thing. And I think I talked about it on one of my podcast episodes, and we joked that we weren't trying to be man children or anything like that. More so it was just, hey, let's save some money. And our parents wanted us to live with us for a little while until we could save up and buy a place and move out. But anyways, found Peter T very early on, which was fantastic. Would go up and study with him. And I would say that went on for maybe a couple years. And then Peter explained to me that he wanted to go to Japan, and he ended up going to Japan. And during that time, I worked with Boone. So I joined the BIB club, and I started doing Boone's intensives. That's how I started studying under Boone. I remember asking Peter, who should I study with when you're gone? And he recommended Boone, so I started working with Boone in the Bay Area and finished the intensive series with Boone, which I think was 10 3-day workshops over a few years. After that, I joined the Bay Island Bonsai Club, and I was part of that for a while. And I continued to study with Boone. When Peter came back, I was working with Boone and Peter for a little while. More recently, over the last few years, I've been pretty much primarily working under Peter, but I have a high amount of respect for both Boone and Peter. I think they're both fantastic bonsai teachers. In there in 2015, I went to Japan for about 2.5 weeks. I got to study at Aichien Bonsai Nursery, but it was very short term, about 2.5 weeks. So that was an incredible experience as well. And these days, I generally go up to see Peter T for periods of a few days at a time. And usually I'll bring a bunch of trees up to his house. We'll work on them. We'll do like 3 long days, and then I'll come back to my house and I'll work on my trees here by myself as well. Hope that answers your question. That's a crazy
story. No, that was awesome. That just spawned so many questions for me. So I have to see if I can remember them all. But okay, so first of all, that's such a fortuitous start, I feel like. Like, you got into bonsai and then you started with, one of, if not the top practitioner in the US. Was Peter like as renowned at that time before he had gone to Japan? Or, what were the decisions you used? What were the criteria you used to kind of decide on Peter? Or maybe there weren't that many options even at that time too. So
yeah, that's a great question. I said I feel very lucky because I do think a lot of it was kind of just dumb luck. And I feel like as a beginner, you don't really know what you don't know yet. And I definitely don't think that I had a vast understanding of what high quality bonsai looked like quite yet. However, for whatever reason, I saw his work very early on, and I was able to speak with him and talk with him, and I could tell he was extremely intelligent, and his work looked phenomenal to me. I mean, it just blew me out of the water completely, looking at the wiring that he did, and just he had nice trees even back then, I mean, for what I was into. One thing that really impressed me was I've always been really into going up into the mountains, into the Sierra specifically, and I've always loved Sierra juniper. And the first Sierra juniper I ever saw in real life was at Peter T's house, and he did a really good styling on this tree. And so I think that also impressed me. But really, I mean, it wasn't like I debated between a ton of different teachers or anything like that. I think he was kind of just starting out, so it was very lucky. But as the years have progressed, I've seen him develop his skill and talent even more. And now he is very well known, I feel like, in the bonsai community, and have just stuck with him ever since.
Yeah, makes sense. Did you started your bonsai kind of career very young? Was that a sacrifice? Like, I imagine, you were giving up weekends to go pretty far, a few hours away, as well as I'm sure there was cost associated with these learnings, right? And I felt like whenever I started my journey, I was like very averse to like, oh man, it's very expensive to go and fly somewhere or drive out and stay for a weekend, and the class is $500, $1,000 or whatever. So I'm curious, like, did it feel like you were making a sacrifice at the time, or like was it a little bit nerve-wracking to be spending that much money on this tree hobby at the time? Or like, how did that journey feel for you when you were starting?
Yeah, I think that I realized very early on that education within bonsai from the correct individuals is probably the thing that will catapult your understanding of bonsai more so than anything else. And if you can work with someone in person, I mean, I think that's the best way to learn from them. And so I realized very early on that I should be putting a lot of effort into working with a good teacher. And so, yes, most definitely. I mean, right out of college, I definitely did not have very much money at all. And, I would do whatever I had to do to pay for those things. And so, yeah, like sometimes, I would sleep in the back of my truck, or I would go actually stay with my cousin's house, or I crashed on some friends' couches. But to me, it was just, I got so much out of going to see Peter and Boone early on that it was well worth it. And I would, there's nothing that I would change about that, because I think that they just set me up on the right path and taught me so much. So I think that experience was incredibly valuable, and I would highly recommend, like, any new individuals into bonsai, put your money into education and you won't regret it. High quality education.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's been a consistent theme with folks that came in that we've talked about. Education is like there's really no substitute for actually doing bonsai hands-on under the guidance of someone who knows more than you, right? Or you know, is that you want to make trees that look like theirs.
Absolutely.
I also spawned a question of, you know, it sounds like Peter was already making really impressive trees before he went to Japan, and I'm assuming he didn't fundamentally change. Like, he was already doing really highly technical, like very detail-oriented work before going to Japan, as well as, obviously, for me, I've only known of his work since, I guess, post-Japan, just because of when I got into bonsai. So I'm curious from your perspective, like, were there any big shifts in how he was teaching or what he was teaching or what his trees looked like before and after Japan?
Well, so I think that Peter just gets bonsai, and I think that there's a natural thing. Maybe there is some innate ability where he just understands things. I mean, before he was into bonsai, he was a mechanic, and personally, like, I'm not good with that type of thing, and so I'm just impressed with it, but I think that his mind works very much. It's very mechanical in nature. I think that, I'm sure, like, definitely going to Japan, I mean, he grew by leaps and bounds, but at the same time, I think Peter's approach is to always be learning, always be a student of the game. And I've seen him, you know, learn little, like, it's not as large of leaps these days probably as when maybe he was in Japan. However, he's always improving. He's always getting better. He's always teaching new little aspects of bonsai. And so I think more he's got that Kaizen mentality where he's just making small incremental improvements over a long period of time. And it's really shown in his work because it's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I think there's different styles in bonsai, but I don't think anybody could look at a tree that Peter's done or, you know, been involved in and say, oh, this isn't executed perfectly. You can see the intention in his designs, right? Where someone crafted this thing, which I think, or to me, is very impressive at least.
Definitely. I would agree with that.
I wanted to ask you a bit about your goals in bonsai and maybe even how those have changed over time. Because, you know, whenever you started your journey, you maybe weren't thinking of bonsai having this like large place in your life, or you maybe weren't just thinking about the long term, right, as a younger individual. And then, I mean, you're still young, but for me at least, as I've kind of left my 20s, I start to think of like, oh, what do I want my life to look like going forward? And that's changed how I think about my goals in bonsai. So I'm curious, you know, if you could talk a little bit about that journey for you and like what your goals are today and maybe how those have changed over time.
Yeah, most definitely. And I would love to get your thoughts and opinion and make this question very much a conversation. I can tell you what my goals are now, and I do have a lot of goals when it comes to bonsai. I think goals are very important for anything that you want to pursue at a high level. I think, yeah, and I kind of struggle with my goals to a degree. So I would say one of my biggest goals revolves around my bonsai collection, and that's where I kind of struggle. So I really want to have a very, very nice collection. I would like to have a small collection, probably ending up somewhere between 15 to about 20 trees, depending on size and things like that. But essentially, I'm always trading up with my trees, and I really want to have 15 to 20 trees that are in the top 7 of the variety within the US. So like, you know, if I have a Chinese quince, I want it to be in the top 7 best within the United States. If I have a Sierra juniper, it should be in the top 7 best Sierra juniper in the United States. And I don't know, I'm kind of torn because I think for a long time I was thinking, well, there's not much, is there skill or talent, or is it hard to be good at collecting things? Or is that just like a question of, hey, like, you know, you have a lot of money, you just buy things and it's so easy. And I'd be curious, let me tell you kind of my thoughts there and elaborate a little bit more on that. And so I guess when I first started in bonsai, I really did not have that much money. Now, I mean, I still, you know, I'm not the one that's going to go out and be able to just spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on trees. And, you know, there's always going to be people that can spend a whole lot more money than I could spend on bonsai. But I'm in a spot now, at least, that I could spend more on trees. But I do think that there is like skill and talent to creating a very high quality bonsai collection. And so some of my other goals are, one is I want a few of those trees to be produced 100% by me. And so that means I would like to grow a few from seed cutting or air layer. And then I would also like to collect a few of those. So starting as Yamadori from a raw trunk and then work on the tree over time. So those things. And then also I do think that there's like skill and talent when it comes to acquiring extremely high quality trees. Like you can't just go to a bonsai store. You can't just like order it off Amazon, like, hey, give me one of the top 7 trident maples in the United States and order it off Amazon. Like you can get all this other stuff. So I think that there is like skill and talent to collecting bonsai, which is a weird thing. And I'm very torn and conflicted about that because I don't want to just be, the person that just spends all this money to buy high quality trees. I want to earn them, which is kind of funky, and I don't know if that even makes sense, but those are some of my goals, like around my collection. And I kind of wanted to start with that and then get your thoughts on that.
Those, I think, are all really laudable goals. I love that the ultimate goal is having a top 7 example of that specific variety in the US. And I think your is bonsai pay to win question is interesting. I'm curious, what do you think the reasoning is behind, why does it have to be top 7? There could be a lot of reasons for that. There's a competitive aspect. There's a self-internalized version of I'm measuring against myself and trying to have some kind of subjective measure of how good I'm doing at the collecting process, or collecting. So I think there's different motivators for that, right? And they're all perfectly valid, but I'm curious, what do you think that motivator is for you for it to be a top 7?
That's a great question. And I don't know if I've thought about that enough. I mean, definitely a lot of it is for selfish purposes. I want to walk out into my bonsai garden and I want to enjoy my bonsai collection. And I would say, to me, bonsai are the most beautiful things other than my wife in the world. I just absolutely think that they are just so incredibly fascinating and astonishingly beautiful. So I do think that some of it is selfish. I just look at them and I'm in awe, and it helps to balance out my life just in terms of being able to look at beauty and relax. And it makes me kind of stop and smell the roses and take time to enjoy something that's beautiful. But yeah, I guess also there's a challenge aspect to it personally. I want to see if I can do it. I think that's really hard. I guess I want a goal that is that pushes me and challenges me, but it's also not completely unrealistic. For example, if I said, hey, I want to go join the NBA, maybe I could have joined the NBA if I started basketball when I was 4 years old, but I didn't do that. And now I'm 41. I'm kind of old. And that's not realistic, right? So I think top 7 for me, I think that pushes me hard enough to try and figure it out, but it's not completely out of the question. And I also think that there's just a lot of subjectivity when you talk about, okay, what is a top 7 Sierra juniper in the United States look like? There's going to be a lot of people that may rank that tree where it's out of the top 7, or some people that would rate it in the top 7. But I think generally speaking, if the majority of the people would consider it a top 7, then that's where I want to orient. Yeah. I don't know if I answered your question.
I have a similar... I haven't thought of it in terms of the top 7, but I like that construct because, well, for me, it's if you're gonna make something, whatever it is, a big part of your life, and you're gonna devote, bonsai is such a long-term pursuit, right? You're gonna be doing this for the rest of your life. So if you're gonna devote 40 years or 50, 60, whatever, however many years to this thing that you're gonna fill your life with, then to some extent making it challenging and making sure that it's keeping you guessing, and I feel that top 7 criteria gives you something to target your fulfillment within the hobby around, right? Where it's like a goal. It's something that increases the complexity, allows you to really interact with the pursuit more intentionally, right? So adding that constraint to the hobby helps you constrain your decisions and requires a lot more of strategy. And I feel like just like having those really long-term wins is what, for me, like gives you fulfillment from life, or like something that you're targeting. For me, one of my midterm goals is I want to have work that I have done be accepted into the Pacific Bonsai Expo. And so that means I have to buy material that, if worked correctly, can be of high enough caliber to get into the expo. And then I need to develop the skills to actually have my work, look good. So I feel like that is a similar kind of criteria where, for me, it's not about like, I am actually a fairly competitive person, but in this context, like I'm not trying to like show that my tree is better than others or something like that. But I think some amount of external validation, or like relative validation within your goals, makes them more challenging, and also makes them so that like you have to actually prove it, right? There's an external component that you don't control, so like you get some feedback on whether or not you're actually, accomplishing your goal. It's not just like, oh yeah, I wanted to make a great tree, and then if it just sits in your backyard and nobody ever sees it, like, yes, that can be totally fulfilling for someone. But I think for me at least, and I'm still kind of crystallizing some of these thoughts, but if you're devoting so much time and energy to something, like I want to do it really well, and I want to have the output of my hard work be good. And I think one way to get some external validation is a good way to have that acknowledgement or not have that acknowledgement. Not that the external validation itself is important, but it's a good measuring tape, I guess, right? And so it can help you understand and get feedback on where you're at. Hopefully Absolutely. That makes sense. That was a little bit convoluted, but no problem at all. I also have been struggling a lot with the pay to win aspect of bonsai.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about that, because that's a fun topic. Okay. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead and give your thoughts first.
So yeah. Pay to win. Yes. Okay. So first off, I mean, I am not coming from a place where, hey, I can just go out and spend as much money as possible to create this collection. But I do think that there are things that you can do, even as a young person, that can set you up for success. And I guess one thing that I feel very good about. So I've only shown 3 trees, I believe. So I showed two trees at the U.S. National and 2 trees at the Pacific Bonsai Expo, but one was the same tree. So out of those trees, I only spent $1,000. Actually, $1,007.50 on those trees. And I got a PBE award and I got a national award. And so I'm very, very proud of that. And I didn't spend very much money. So, and I think, like, for example, the redwood was $1,000 and I bought it at rough stock. I think now it would be more expensive. However, I do think that, as a person just getting into bonsai, you do have to pay for bonsai in one way or another, but you can do it in multiple ways. So you can either pay it with money, or you can do it with effort and time. And so with those trees in particular, I collected the 2 Sierra junipers. So I went out, I figured out how to get permits, which cost $7.50. And then I collected the trees and started working on them. And I think that was really cool. Early on, I realized, hey, the best trees are either going to be collected trees, or you're going to grow them from seed cutting and air layer. You're going to work on the trunks. And so I do think, even if you are someone that's just getting into bonsai, like you can do those two avenues, and you can have, great success in the long run. And then also, I think you can always trade up within your collection. Let's say you buy a tree for $200. Well, next time, maybe you'll get a $300 tree, but you could sell that $200 tree for $200, and then it's only $100 more. So I don't know. That's kind of how, some ways, I rationalize it in my mind and think about it. But I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
I think those are excellent points. I think there are avenues through collecting, through just having longer amounts of time to create amazing trees, like top tier trees from relatively low amounts of money. I think the aspect that I struggle a little bit with is, or where I've kind of thought of bonsai as pay to win to some extent, is that there are these pipelines of trees that you can buy, right? If you're not collecting trees yourself or growing them, then you're basically getting trees from, Bob Scheinman, Randy Knight, any of the top like brokers of trees, like most professionals like Jonas or Andrew or Ryan, or Peter, they are selling trees, right, to their clients. And there's always going to be a best one of those, right? So if you want the, of a batch of junipers that Randy Knight gets, for example, you're always thinking of it relatively, right? Maybe you happen to be lucky that you're there that one day where the top 1 or top 5 juniper in the size category you want comes in and you can buy it right away. But realistically, the best trees that are coming in through these established pipelines from the top collectors, there's somebody who has first dibs, right? And so the best example of that species, there's always going to be someone's eyes on it before you, right? And those collectors, my intuition at least, is that to some extent, the first look goes to the people who are spending the most with them, right? And then, if it's a Ryan or a Todd Schlafer or whoever, then, or a Peter, then that tree then gets sold to their top student or whatever, right? Or the people that are spending money with them, right? They have these established pathways, right? And so to some extent, if you want to have, just like you were talking about, if you want to have this top collection, it's very strategic. One aspect of that is you need to be strategic. If you only have a certain amount of money, you need to be strategic about where you spend that money so that you can cultivate that special relationship for the pipeline of trees that you're interested in, right? And so that's where I had a conversation about this with Andrew Robson, where I was talking about oh, you're a broker of top trees. Oh, there's this top tree out there. When you buy that tree, who are you then selling it to? Probably one of your top clients. And just from the nature of people doing business, a lot of the times there's some financial, to being a top client, there's some financial aspect to it. And so if you have unlimited funds, then you can have first dibs on everyone's pipe. But if you're working within a constraint, then you might have to be more strategic about where you buy material from. And you might need to think about that of how do I increase my likelihood of maybe I'm never going to be the first look, but maybe I'll be the third or fourth or fifth, right? Or I'll be on the list of people who gets to look at it early, right? And so I don't know if you agree with that at all or not.
Oh, 100%.
If you have a batch of 5 Chinese quinch that you've grown in your garden, is it more likely that that's going to go to some random person on the internet who is going to pay top dollar, or is it going to go to, a student that you another person within your group, right? The best one, right? So, or maybe it just goes to you, but yeah, that's kind of a long-winded way of saying I think there is some aspect of there's some strategy to where you purchase material and how you form your relationships within the community.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, the whole pay to win concept, that is true. If you're Mr. Moneybags, you could just go out there and you treat Randy Knight really, really well. It's easy. And I think for most people, it's not that easy. But I just look at it as a challenge. And a few things. The point that you made about where you spend your money and kind of creating loyalty and building relationships with a particular individual, particular collectors, for example. We'll just use Randy Knight as the example because we've been talking about him. So yeah, 100%. I think Randy's going to sell his best trees to his best customers, as he should. And if you don't have tons and tons of money, then yes, you can't go out and buy the number one tree and you're not going to get it anyways. But I do think if you have a really good reputation in the community, you treat Randy very well. And hey, maybe you go out there and you say, Randy, my budget is $4,000, which is decent budget. But you say, hey, $4,000, you buy a tree. Well, maybe you're definitely not getting his best tree for $4,000. However, years down the road, you can keep trading up. And maybe now you're at like the 30K range because you've traded up so many times and, you've built that reputation over time with him. And then eventually, you might get his top tree. And so I do 100% agree with you. I mean, like, it is pay to play or pay to win. There is definitely that going on. But at the same time, I think if you look at it as a challenge and you just figure out how do we work around this challenge, eventually you're going to keep improving your collection and get there. So that would be my thoughts there.
Yeah, I love that. That makes sense. Yeah, and some of the one thing I'm sad about is that I wish I would have invested as heavily as I am now as at the beginning of my journey. It's always like, when was the best time to buy a house? It's like, 10 years ago, but the next best time is now. So it's funny how bonsai is very similar in that aspect, as the hobby's growing really well, and which is awesome. But it just means tree prices go up, and yeah, it makes sense to those investing early in your career and investing to the limit of what you can pays dividends, because it leads you to be able to trade up more quickly, and that compounding just happens a lot faster. That's one thing where, but also early in my journey I was like, I didn't have as much disposable income, and I wasn't as sure that bonsai was going to have this big place in my life, right? So obviously that comes with time or stability as you grow.
Yeah, most definitely. I also do think in many ways I look at high quality trees as not only maintaining their value, but really growing. I really think that as time goes on, high quality trees will always be worth a lot, and they will at least keep up with inflation, most likely exceed inflation. And so it's a little funky, and maybe I'm just, I don't know, like lying to myself or arguing with my mind or justifying it in my own weird way, but like to put more money into bonsai. But I do think that it's not a horrible investment. There's a lot of worse things you could throw money into compared with high quality trees. I think you do need to go with high quality trees. That's my personal thought, but I think that bonsai is growing within the United States, and over time, we can look at them as investments, and I think that they will go up over time. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, bonsai as investment. The challenge for me with that mindset is I almost never think of purchasing a tree as an investment. Like, I'm like, I want this tree for myself for a long time, and so I'm not necessarily thinking of selling it. And then also, I feel like maybe for professionals, like they have established channels for selling trees. But as a hobbyist, if I have a $3,000 tree, it's not really super easy for me to find someone to buy a $3,000 tree. Like, I feel like it's not as liquid as you would want. And so it's hard for me to think of as an investment if there's not a high degree of liquidity. And maybe you have a different experience with that, because I feel like you grow, and I don't know what your experience is with like selling higher quality trees, but I find if I want to sell something for, $100 to $300 and it's smaller, like that's very easy to do. Like in my club sale or auction or something like that, there's not a lot of trees going for $500+, right? And then for me, like, if I want a high quality small collection, most of my trees are going to be over that amount, even as raw material. So I'm wondering like what your experience has been with the actual liquidity of bonsai.
Yeah, so personally, I think that one of the downsides to owning high quality bonsai, and I say investment, I could argue very easily that there's, many things that you should invest in before you invest in bonsai. Although I don't know, it's like, what else does bonsai do for you that like say, hey, if I put my money in the stock market, like it's just not the same thing. Like I get a whole lot of more enjoyment out of that bonsai. So maybe there's some value in that. But yeah, I don't think bonsai is very liquid. I think it would be not intelligent to think of it as very liquid. More so what I'm thinking is if you hold it for a long period of time, you also need to have the confidence in your ability to maintain the health and progress the tree over time. But I would 100% think that any tree that you got, you keep it in good shape, you style it, you improve the quality and development of the tree, that at a certain point it'd be worth a whole lot more money in the future. And personally, if I was going to sell a whole bunch of trees, I would probably wait until I have several to sell. And then I would probably vend at the PBE or something like that and just blow them all out at one time. Yeah, I don't think clubs are like a great way to sell trees. That's just my personal opinion. I mean, and I hate shipping trees personally, so I would not be into that. I would rather just do one big event type thing. And I think something like the PBE would be perfect for that. That's how I would do it, but I don't know.
That makes sense. The other thing I struggle with is if I buy a tree, like I'm very confident that I can keep it healthy if it's the species that know grow well in my area, and I'm very confident that it'll improve over time. But the other thing is, if I start thinking of it as an investment, then I have to think about what is my time worth. And if I buy a tree for $500 and then 3 years from now it's worth $1,500, but I've put in 100 hours to that tree or whatever, maybe less than 100, but I start doing the math around like what my time is worth, and suddenly I'm paying myself $10 an hour to take care of this tree, right? And so, that increased value doesn't just come for free, right? It comes for the cost of your hours. And so that's why I struggle with thinking about doing bonsai professionally, because I don't think we properly value the amount of time and energy that goes into these trees often.
I thought you brought up some really interesting points about what is your time worth when doing bonsai. And yeah, I mean, I would completely agree with you there in terms of looking at bonsai as an investment. I guess the only thing that I would say to that would be, I know that you want to be working on trees anyways, so you might as well work on really, really good trees, really high quality trees. And if looking at bonsai as an investment helps you to buy higher quality trees because you're going to be putting your time in anyways, then I think it's worth it. But I don't know. That's my opinion.
That makes sense.
And maybe I'm just justifying it in my mind to spend money on trees. So
honestly, I think that's smart though, because, well, for me personally, I'm naturally a very frugal person, I'll say. So I have to do these kind of tricks with myself to make sure that I'm not inhibiting myself for no reason to reach my goals in bonsai, right? For my goals, there is a certain amount of money that I will need to invest to hit them, right? And so
yes,
I think you're right that might be a mindset that I'll adopt if it helps me even get 1% better at buying that tree that I should buy at that point in my journey.
Yeah. Well, I have very opinionated views on this stuff. And one of those opinionated views is I am also very frugal when it comes to many things. However, bonsai is not necessarily one. And I guess my opinion is that I always think about that I want to 10x the areas that really, really matter to me. So for example, in my life, the things that are really important to me are my family, bonsai, and health. I'm all about 10xing the areas that are really important to you in your life. And so for me, it's family, health, bonsai. And so I'm all about, hey, do whatever you can do to cut costs in all the areas outside of those three areas. But then in those three areas that are important to me, what if we 10x'd all that? So what if I actually bought the trees that I wanted, but maybe I go to the dollar store and buy my shampoo and, watch a lot of my spending. Personally, I drive a little Toyota Prius, which is not the coolest, flashiest car, but then I spend a lot of money when it comes to trees. So some of my opinionated thoughts there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think a few years ago when I decided to double down on bonsai, a big part of that was, hey, I want to go from this very austere, very low level of spend in general in my life to let's take some targeted risks where I'm not worried about whether the money was worth it or if I wasted it. Let's just spend some money on this thing and see if I get more enjoyment out of life. And turns out, I did. It was I started putting more investment into my own learning in bonsai, and I started enjoying it a lot more. And I upgraded from Home Depot trees to collected trees from Bob Scheiman, and it increased my enjoyment of the hobby and life. And so, yeah, that was a very big transition for me, I'd say, in terms of learning to let go a little bit. And definitely, I'm assuming that the 10xing that you're talking about, it results in more fulfillment for you. And like you're choosing to spend money on the areas that give you that 10x fulfillment or enjoyment versus the areas that adding additional money doesn't give you any additional fulfillment or happiness or joy.
Exactly.
Or like not as it's not as there's not as much of a multiplicative effect.
Totally. Like, I really don't care that much if I am buying, the cheap generic dollar store stuff. When it comes to like shampoo, it just doesn't bother me that much. However, if I get to work with a very high level bonsai tree and watch it develop over the next 25 years, like I'm going to get a whole heck of a lot of enjoyment, fulfillment, happiness by looking at that tree every single day. And I just really, it's not that much of a sacrifice to cut in other areas. So I do try and put a lot of focus on where can I cut spending, and all that I can cut, I'm going to put into things that give me a lot of benefit and things that are important to me in my life, is definitely bonsai is one of those.
Yeah. Speaking of targeted investments, I would love to know a little bit about your garden build and like A, like what did it mean to you? And then B, what are some of the components of that garden, that dream garden, I'm saying, from my perspective at least, seeing the pictures?
Yeah, for sure. Well, do you want me to start with where and when I kind of decided to build it?
I would love that, yes.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time up in the Sierra, and I think that is I've kind of learned that's like my happy place. I work in an office very frequently, and what I've found is that getting up into the mountains really just balances me out. It really just balances out the soul and the spirit, makes me happy just being around such a beautiful environment. And for me, that place that is just so beautiful and I love so much is up in the Sierra. So I got into that originally when I was in Boy Scouts when I was a little kid. Then I totally got out of going up to the Sierra. I didn't go for many, many years. Getting into bonsai, I started collecting again in about 2008, 2009. And I started spending more time up in the Sierra. And on one of those trips, I was eating lunch. Basically, I would pack a lunch and I would just find a really cool spot to eat lunch and enjoy the view and take a break from collecting. And so this particular time, and I can't remember exactly when it was, but sometime early on, I sat down, I was eating my lunch, and I saw Sierra junipers, I saw ponderosa pine, I saw all this rock, all this granite rock that was surrounding me. And then there was also, I was sitting by a stream, or actually it was more like a river, like a small river, and there was trout in the stream. And I was just looking around and I was like, man, like these three elements, so like the rock, the water, the fish, and the trees, they just like come together. And when you have all these elements together, it's just so incredibly beautiful. And I would like just absolutely love to have this in my backyard someday. And so that was really kind of the impetus behind wanting to build this bonsai garden and have my trees on display. Is I wanted that same kind of feeling where when I was eating lunch and it was just so blissful and beautiful when I was looking around. I was so happy and content and I felt so balanced in life. And I just felt like if I had that, and I could go there on a daily basis, water my bonsai trees, look around my garden, then I would be in a good spot. So that was kind of like the initial part of building my garden.
Wow, that's fascinating. I have always thought of like, oh, I really like Japanese gardens and I want that feeling. I love spending time in the mountains, and I never even thought that there was a possibility of like, can you bring that experience to your home? So that's very interesting that you kind of had that epiphany, and yeah, it sounds very, very enticing. So yeah, I would love to hear more about what tactically helps evoke that feeling, right? Like what components, like did you have to have a certain species of tree in the yard? Is there like boulders that you got from a specific place that remind you of that location? Like how did you bring the water element into it? I'm very curious about some of those tactical things, but please tell me what you think is interesting to tell about the story as well.
Yeah, for sure. Building a space to look at my trees and appreciate them on a daily basis has been interesting. And, Yeah, I don't know. I also love Japanese gardens. I think they do it the best in the world in Japan. But at the same time, and I know I've spoken with Sam, and I think we have similar feelings to this. We didn't necessarily want to just create a straight up Japanese garden. Personally, I was very influenced by the Sierra, and so I wanted to bring as many of those elements into my bonsai display garden as possible. So, for example, the boulders, which I absolutely love boulders, and I need a whole lot more, they are all granite sourced from the Sierra. And so, like, I went to Fresno, which is close to the Sierra, to a rockery or a rock yard, and picked those out. And I selected several plants that grow up in the Sierra. So, for example, manzanita. I really love a lot of California natives. I've got manzanita. I've got some California wild rose. I've got penstemon, which are some of my favorite California natives. What's kind of funky, and I definitely don't know, in many ways, I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to building a nice display bonsai garden, is I'm kind of fusing different elements and different cultural aesthetics into my bonsai garden. So I'm also taking elements of Japanese gardening, and I have no experience with this. So this is really like the first round draft, the first iteration, and I hope to keep creating new versions of it and improving it slowly over time. So it's very much not finished by any means. It's just like, here's the first round draft, and slowly I'm going to update it and change it to whatever pops into my mind. But yeah, I mean, there's so many things to think about when you are building a bonsai garden. I wanted it to be functional. I wanted my trees to be displayed at a pretty high height. I wanted everything to be really sturdy, so on my bonsai display stands to be super sturdy. But it has to be so that I can maneuver my hydraulic lift cart around the garden and get to every display stand. And so, yeah, it's a constant evolving thing. And I think that it will absolutely get better with time as I have more time to work on it and adjust and fine tune. But really, I'm fusing different types of plants. I'm really just going with the plants that I love. So whether those are from Asia or Japan, or whether they're California natives, I'm kind of putting them all together, which I really don't know if that is the right response or not. I actually think someday it would be really cool to divide out the garden and have individual spaces where, say, hey, I have a California native section here, and then my traditional Japanese bonsai garden is over here. And in the Japanese area, I have traditional Japanese and Asian species, whereas in the California native area, I have a specific plant community, up in the Sierra, and I focus on plants that are in that area. Those are some of my thoughts there.
Very cool. Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is the actual design aspect of it is very difficult. I'm curious, how much do you think, the initial goal was bring some of that peace and serenity from the mountains into your home? And I'm curious, definitely, it sounds like this is V1 and you want to keep improving, but I'm curious how, as someone who wants to do something very similar, and a landscaping project like that is not a cheap endeavor, right? So it takes sacrifice to do something like that. I'm curious, how much of that have you been able to bring to your house, and how much of a difference has it made in your life? I'm assuming it's worth it, but I'm just curious what your feelings are so far.
Yeah. So, yes, I mean, I definitely think it has been worth it for me. And the amount of appreciation that I get from it, I think, is definitely evident from the amount of time that I find myself there. So I'm always just running into my bonsai garden. And there's some additional reasons why you might want to build a bonsai garden. I would say, for security purposes, it's really nice. My garden's all fenced in with a 7-foot tall fence, which I think is really nice, just for keeping things out of the bonsai garden. But yeah, I mean, I spend a ton of time in there, and I really do get a lot of enjoyment out of it. So the whole stop and smell the roses, I think I've struggled with that in the past. And I think that in many ways, getting to go out there, take some time, drink my coffee, water my trees, it's just extremely enjoyable. and I really love being in there. At the same time, like I said before, I'm not happy with where it is in other aspects, but I can enjoy what I've built so far. So I always want to be improving it, and I guarantee 10 years from now it's going to look quite different and quite better than it does now. But it's still, even with what I have right now, I'm happy with it and I get a lot of enjoyment out of it.
That's awesome. Yeah, from the pictures, it looks awesome. Hopefully I'll get to see it one of these days. I'm curious if you did a renovation of kind of your workspace or like the actual workshop area in addition to the garden at the same time. That's something that I'm really excited about, is like having a purpose-built workshop that makes it really ergonomic to work on my trees, that's connected to my bonsai garden. Like that for me is like a big component of why I want to pursue this kind of tailored space, just so that it makes it easier for me to work on my trees and makes it a more pleasant experience. I'm curious, did you pursue that at the same time, or did you already have a really good workspace?
So we were really lucky when I bought this house about 5 years ago. It already had a work space for me, which was fantastic. It's nothing fancy, but the previous owner used to work on cars in this workshop, and it's pretty much just like a metal building with a little bit of insulation, but not like extensive like in most houses. But it's a good size. It's got a straight cement floor, and I haven't done anything to that. I mean, I work on my trees in the workshop, but upgrades for that are going to be down the road. I really wanted to focus all my time and attention on the bonsai garden. It is so nice to have a spot to work on trees in as well. Unfortunately, just because the way that my property is laid out, it's quite far from my bonsai garden. However, I'm okay with it because it just gets me a little bit more of a workout, like carrying my trees from the bonsai garden into the workshop and back. And I have a really nice hydraulic cart with the pneumatic wheels, which is really great, which I think Sam has as well. And that makes it very doable.
That's awesome. Yeah, that sounds like a great workshop space. And once the tree's on the cart, like, you know, a little bit of extra distance doesn't break the back. So.
For sure.
Those carts are really nice. That's definitely a good investment.
Absolutely. 100%. Can I ask you, what do you envision, like long term, what would you envision your bonsai garden to look like?
Yeah. You know, it's hard to fully put into practice because my wife and I are still kind of figuring out where exactly we want to live. And like right now we're living in downtown San Francisco. And so, you know, I have a balcony and I do have a little bit of a backyard in the place that we're renting, but it doesn't get any sun. So the main place where my trees are like through these French doors right in the kitchen. Like there's these French doors out to like full window out to my deck. And that's where all my trees are. So it's a pretty small space, and, you know, there's not really a lot of capability to, you know, gardenify it. You know, I can't add monkey poles or like landscaping and things like that. So I think what my dream garden would look like depends a little bit on like where my wife and I end up buying a more longer term house, right? I guess. So it's a little bit hard to imagine, but I think I would model it a lot after like a Japanese garden, like the ones that you see in Japan or like the Portland Japanese garden. So I'd want to have some of those kind of like Miyawaki-esque trees, some Japanese maple, love to have some boulders. I really like the Japanese garden elements, like the paved paths and the kind of mossy floors. So I would kind of want to have an experience like that. And then I'd want a more utilitarian space that maybe has a greenhouse and a workshop and like some nursery-esque benches for grow projects and things like that. So I'm imagining having a pretty small space just because my wife really wants to live in like a very urban setting. And so because of that, we're going to be definitely limited in space. And I think that's okay. I mean, you can make a beautiful garden in a smaller space. And, you know, I'd like to have maybe like 2 to 4 benches of grow projects in pots plus a like display garden in which you can have a little bit more of an intimate, unique experience. So that's kind of what I'm imagining right now. But again, it's hard to decide until I get into that, like into the constraints of the space that I'm given to build that in, right? So it's hard to imagine until I have like this is the exact amount of space. Here's the unique aspects of the space. So I want it to be unique to wherever we end up being. So I guess that's my current answer. Another like non-negotiable is I want to have a really beautiful workshop space. So kind of like a lime washed walls, like earthen feeling workshop where I have perfect lighting and it's comfortable and I can have all my tools and pots set up, kind of similar to what Sam's house looks like. If you've seen pictures of his workshop, I just want that ergonomic feel, and I want to be able to take nice photos of my work in a really convenient place. Like right now, I live in a 1-bedroom, and so I can't like hang. My wife would murder me if I hung a big thing of photo paper off the wall and right above the dining table. So it's like very pain in the butt to like take photos or try to do some videos. And like I don't really care about, the number of Instagram followers or things like that, but I do want to connect with the people in the community. Like that's part of why this conversation with you has been so fun, right? And like I want to be doing this for a long time and have a community around it. And I feel like getting to share your work with others is how you connect with people, right? And so I do want a ergonomic experience that helps me optimize that connection with others. I think the thing that I struggle with the most in bonsai is that it's actually a pretty solitary pursuit, like actually doing tree work in general, right? It's kind of a pain in the butt to bring your trees over to somebody else's house or whatever. And so I really like yearn for and enjoy that connection, and it helps me get through the hours of kind of sitting and focusing to be able to connect with others. And so I want to have an experience that's optimized for that.
Beautiful. Can't wait to see it.
Yeah, coming at some point, whenever I can afford to buy a house in California and San Francisco. We were actually looking at Sausalito. That could be an interesting spot. I'm also going to come down to SLO soon. That's a part of our, see if there's other areas in California that we'd want to move to potentially. So
nice.
Yeah, hopefully that visit goes well.
Very cool. Very cool. That's exciting. And sounds like you got a lot of great ideas, and that space would be truly incredible. So excited to see it.
Yeah. Well, I take inspiration from all the people that are already doing it. It's so cool to see people investing in purpose-built spaces for displaying bonsai and showing bonsai, so we can all learn from each other and create awesome experiences. So I love seeing your garden and Sam's garden. I really like Michigan Yamadori. I love his videos he posts with all those conifers, the wet atmosphere and the gravel. That's a cool space. Bonsai Mirai is beautiful. Todd Schlafer's garden is gorgeous. Andrew Robson's. So I take pictures of these things that I want to incorporate into my garden in the future as I see them, and I save them in a little album. And I'm just saving up all these little things for whenever I get to make that investment.
Ooh, that's a great tip right there. I like that. Take what you like and save them. Nice.
I'm hoping my wife helps me too, because she has an excellent she's an excellent designer, I guess, or interior designer. I don't know. She's done a great job with our house. So, and she has a very wabi-sabi aesthetic. So I think her help would help a lot.
Oh, that's rad. So cool. Yeah, I think I was just going to say, Jeremiah. Last thing on the bonsai garden, for me personally, if I had more money, I would probably hire for more of it. And so I know, I'm a big fan of, and I'm totally going to butcher his name, but Bill Costellan, I think is his name.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, his really nice, and I would love to hire out to do some better work than I could do myself, or I could manage myself. So that would be great.
Yeah, that would be the dream. He actually came, and he's a part of the club that I'm a part of, the East Bay Bonsai Society, and he gave a talk on his business, building beautiful Japanese gardens, and all the craftsmen he brings over from Japan. And he also does a lot of his company does a lot of trail building in the mountains too. So you can thank him for those beautiful trails that you love going through with all the big stone slabs in the mountains and things like that for stairs.
Yeah.
So I've really been enjoying the podcast format, and I think it actually has a lot of merit. But on the surface, at least, bonsai is, I feel very visual, right? And so as a learning medium, a podcast probably isn't the best for actually learning how to build bonsai. There's no, we were talking about, there's no substitute for in-person learning. But I'm curious, what made you decide to start the Black Pondo? And what do you think podcasts are good for within bonsai?
Yes. So yeah, I definitely think that There's no substitute for the in-person stuff, and video format is fantastic for showing many things as well. We have Instagram now. There are books. I think some of the advantages for me personally when it comes to podcasts are that when I listen to podcasts, I find myself being able to do other things while I'm listening. So I do think that for everyone out there, you can drive, you can go for a jog, you can work on trees while you're listening, whereas that's very challenging to do with other learning formats. So I would say that for me is probably the biggest advantage, and one of the reasons that I listen to podcasts so much. Whenever I'm traveling or working on trees, cleaning around the house, I'm usually listening to a podcast, and it's great that you can learn while you're doing those other things. And then in terms of what type of conversations I find valuable, or like what types of things I think we can learn from podcasts, I think personally I'm still learning that. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, on like what you think there. I guess for me, I do think that certain topics, especially longer format topics, can be really successful on podcasts. So for example, recently my favorite episode of the Black Pondo podcast that I recorded was with Peter T. And I got Peter to dive into the subject of, should you graft junipers or not? And I think that really deserves a long format. It deserves a lot of discussion, because it's not just a simple, yes, you should graft them, or no, you should not. There are just so many factors that go into that. And I think that a podcast is a fantastic format to really dive into the nuance there and discuss it from several different angles and hear different points of views. So I think that is like a perfect example of a great topic for podcasts. But I think that there are so many other topics for podcasts. What do you think? What's your thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, I was going to give that same example of my favorite podcast episode was that one with Peter, because he's talking about something that's really deep and nuanced. And I just like that. I feel like in bonsai, a lot of times I don't like being negative online or in person ever. And I feel like sometimes people are doing bonsai in a little bit different ways. And it's easy to kind of like attack these straw men behind, closed doors in your little group. But it was so fascinating for me to hear Peter lay out like his thesis essentially around grafting, right? And then whenever somebody gets that platform, which your podcast, enabled, it then allows the community to have a discussion around it and like advances the community as a whole from like a common understanding. And so I just love that aspect of like getting to hear from people that I guess I'm very impressionable when, whenever I hear Julian talk about like his like what is a good design and style in bonsai in your last episode versus Adam versus hearing what Peter said about grafting, like those things expand my perspective and allow me to look at bonsai in a new way. And I feel like unless you're in the room having like as a part of that group or just a part of that wherever that conversation is happening, you might not get to hear that and you might not get to have that experience. So for me, I just love to be able to look at these topics, and to me that's really valuable, and it helps us kind of grow together as a community and like engage in like more sophisticated dialogue, right? So I love that aspect. That's like what I'll say first. So I'll pause there for a second, but that I think is, to me, was like the penultimate form of a podcast. Like that's such valuable information to be out there.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that you enjoyed that episode, and yeah, it was really cool to hear Peter's perspective. And I think that his perspective has evolved over time, and, he really gets to lay out every different aspect and what to consider if you're thinking about grafting. And so, yeah, I do think that the podcasting format is very beneficial. Love listening to your podcast. Please keep it up. I'm going to listen to every episode, I promise. You do a fantastic job with it. And yeah.
The other thing I think is neat is, honestly, my podcast is kind of for myself to some extent, where I don't have any like monetization goals or anything like that. Like I was going to be thrilled if 5 people listened to it, and I think I had like 150 or almost 200 people listen to one of my episodes. So to me, that's way beyond my expectations. But I want to explore these topics with interesting people, and I want to have these discussions, and I want to connect with people so that I can, learn these diverse perspectives and improve my own capabilities. And this is a very targeted way for me to go, oh, I'm curious about X. Like, who would be the person to talk about that? And then how can I share that with the community to get more feedback on it, right? So to me, there's also like a personal aspect of it where it's like, hey, hopefully this is valuable for others. And like, these are questions that I think are cool to talk about. And like, by having the conversation, I get that. And then if it's helpful to others, then that's, icing on the cake. That just makes it even better. So I think there's also like, the podcast can be a personal journey for you as well, right? So
absolutely.
Concept is interesting too.
Yes. And one point that I love that you said is just that you use what you're passionate about as kind of your guiding principle or what you're going to dive into on the podcast. And I think that's really important. And the best podcasts come from genuine curiosity. So whatever you're interested in, like I want to hear that. And I don't know what that is as the listener until you tell me it. But I think if you use that as your guiding principle, which it sounds like you are, I think your podcast will be really good and authentic.
Yeah, it makes sense. I don't think podcasts are great for like teaching a technique or something like that, right? It's not a great format for that, but I think it's a great way to connect within the community and learn more about people. I like that there's a diversity of voices in the podcast too.
Definitely.
Cool. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Jeremiah. I've seen you around a ton and I've admired a lot of your work, and it was really amazing to talk to you and learn more about you. That's such a fun thing about bonsai, is that you meet people, and because of the nature of the hobby, like these are people that you can know for the rest of your life. And so I'm really excited to meet you and continue to grow our friendship.
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise, I'm very impressed with everything that I've seen so far, Addison. I can really tell how passionate you are about bonsai, and I want to surround myself with really passionate people in life. I think you're doing a fantastic job on this podcast. I love to see that you joined the new talent competition. I'm really excited to see that. Although I'd be really nervous if I was doing it. Props to you for doing that. And yeah, man, I hope we can continue to connect, and would love to have you on my podcast at some point. And let's be homies. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, this
cool, man.
Kind of conversation has me thinking a lot about how we all learn and share and connect in this hobby. We didn't explore the what value is there in podcasts enough, I think. So I'm curious if folks can give feedback on what they find the most valuable, and that'll help us guide what content we bring to you in the future. So don't hesitate to reach out. Definitely listen to the Black Pondo podcast if you haven't. I'm sure there's 0 people who are listening to mine and haven't listened to yours yet, but definitely that's my favorite bonsai podcast in existence. So definitely listen to the Black Pondo, and you can reach out to me at Teeny Trees on Instagram to give ideas for future episodes. And Jeremiah, is there a way that folks can contact you if they have any feedback or thoughts?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram too. I'm at jlee_bonsai. That's the best way. Cool.
Thank you, sir, and have a good night.
You too. Take care, Addison. Thanks so much, man.